and thank you for joining us on a beautiful summer day. I don't know about you, but I have been in summer mode. And so taking it a little bit more easy. I'm actually near the beach right now and plan to go out there this afternoon. So this is the monthly Life Works Well Mentor Circle. And for those who haven't joined before, we pick a different topic every month and dig deep into it we post blogs and social media on the topics. And this month, we're looking at the impact of sponsorship and allyship on organizations and on individuals. And we have quite a good talk planned today. So I'm Helen Patterson. For those of you who don't know me and maybe watching the recording later, we're probably going to have a few more people join as we go. I am the founder of Life Works Well, which is an HR consultancy, and we work on creating heart-centered, high-performance and healthy cultures. And part of our passion is mentorship, sponsorship, and coaching. So this is the perfect topic for us today. We're going to talk about sponsorship, what it is, how it differs from some other relationships like mentoring and coaching. We're going to talk about how it can be a wonderful allyship tool and how allyship, as you know, is a very broad topic, but we're focusing a little bit more on sponsorship and how that relates to it. How to be a great sponsor. Maybe we can touch on a little bit later also how to find one. And it's really a Q&A with Salima, who I'll introduce in a moment. As we always do, we start with the welcome and acknowledgement. And because I'm somewhere else, I took the time to look up where I'm gathering today, and I'm near Rondo Provincial Park. So my normal land acknowledgement, which I can memorize, this one was a bit tough, but this is part of being an ally as well, is actually, we'll look up how to pronounce who are the allies, whose land are we on, and who are we gathering. So I always ask people, if you don't mind telling me where you're from in the comments, in the chat. Also, if you know whose land you are on, that would be great too. So the Amjinoon First Nations, which means spawning stream. I'm going to have to look at this now. It's the Aluna Piwi Laki White. And that took me a long time. You look at that and you can listen. Actually, if you go on Google, you can actually put it in and you can listen to the audio, and it takes a long time. And then there's also the Caldwell First Nations. And I love the park, the provincial park that we're close by right now. They actually worked with all three nations and did some beautiful things at the park. They did some art. They installed a traditional wigwam at the museum. And so it's just a beautiful way to kind of honor the lands and the peoples. So anyway, that's where I am today. So very interesting. Oops, now my thing isn't working. So mentors are, of course, a passion of mine. And when I started researching this quite a few years ago, sponsorship was really not even talked about, like 5 years ago, I'd say, even though Catalyst was probably doing research in how it related to women in the workplace for about 10 years. The last study that they put out was about 2012, which is interesting. Now we're starting to see a little bit more data on it. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that too. What I would love, and this is going to help Salima, and because we're a small group, we could do some intros later as well. But if you could put just in the comments whether or not you've ever had a sponsor, and if not, maybe a mentor. So, because really, Salima would love to gather some of these stories about sponsorship as well. And maybe as we get into it, maybe you want to think about it later, because we're going to talk about what it is. So, some interesting stats, and I'm sure that Salima has a lot more to add, but I didn't see Mohini joining, but Mohini, who's our marketing assistant, often helps with a lot of research. And so interesting enough, there are a few more studies out there that didn't exist before. So historically, again, we were looking at women in the world of work and equity, but now the focus on people of color, Black, Indigenous, other people of color, that really, this is a great way to advance them. So I'm just going to quickly go through the slides. Whoever attends or signs up and also from a newsletter can get this information later. but it's kind of still eye-opening when you see that. Another study too, I thought this was really interesting that, you know, even when you do some data gathering on the actual sponsor and how much they actually advocate. So I'm hoping Salima is going to give us a lot of great information on how those sponsors can do a better job of advocating for their proteges, for their promotion and things like that. So welcome, Salima. I'm so excited for this topic. I met Salima about a year or so ago in a women's entrepreneur group and just love your journey. So I'm going to get you to come out in a second and talk a little bit more about how you transitioned from being in the workplace in very senior roles, as you can see from her bio there, in marketing and other, you know, leadership roles in quite large organizations. And so how did you transition? I'm going to stop the share for a moment, but I mean, you're a speaker, you're a coach, a thought leader now, and I'd love to know, first of all, about your journey and how you transitioned into the world of coaching and now sponsorship and you know, just really supporting women of color.
Yeah, lovely. Happy to. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm going to put myself on mute. I'm just trying to put the speaker view on too, but so for the.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you for the warm welcome, Helen, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And everyone else who has joined us, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because you are right, so important. So how did it get started in this leadership, executive development, allyship world? Really, I one day was presenting social media at an HR conference. And a gentleman at my table said, "Hey, you are really good at speaking, and you would be really good at this." And I'm like, "Well, what's this?" And this gentleman was a keynote speaker. He was doing leadership development. And I had no idea that this was a career and this is something that I could do. I was a professor at the time at George Brown. And he's like, "You already understand adult education. You can certainly make this leap." And I had shared with him that I was, you know, had been in the digital space. It was something I'd fallen in love with when I came out of university, had been in the space for about 17 years, but it was losing its lackluster for me. And so that's kind of how I got started. He made introductions and then off I was. I didn't have any formal training, but because I had had the executive leadership experience, I was able to bring that in. So that's kind of how I got here. And then in terms of my mission of my company today, which is about getting more authentic and diverse voices to the leadership table, that's not, I wish I could say that's where I started, but it actually is a mission that found me. As I had been working and coaching, what I found was that there were a lot of people of color who were attracted to me and wanted to work with me as I built their executive presence. And I started to see some common themes in terms of what were some of the struggles that these people were having. I started to see what were some of the common issues, and a lot of them were issues that I had dealt with as a person of color. And so that kind of led me to my mission today of like, I can make this is, you know, it's one thing to have an impact in terms of from a leadership perspective, but it's another greater depth of impact to be able to actually empower those voices and to really start to create more equity and to bring those people up. You know, the two stories I kind of share are, the first one is when my parents emigrated to Canada. This is in the mid-70s. I was a small baby. We were on a farm, a poultry farm out in rural Alberta, and we were the only people of color for miles. And so our experience, my childhood growing up was very much about being beat up on the bus, being called a packy. You know, my sister was beat up in my classroom, teacher did nothing. Students were, you know, like we just didn't have any friends and nobody really wanted to connect with us. And so my understanding of what school life was like and how to be treated was like, this is just how it is. And then, you know, in grade 5, my parents moved us to the city so that we could have a better life. Didn't understand what that meant. But on my first day of school, what happened is that 2 girls, Andrea and Renee, I still remember their names and their faces, and they came and they asked to play with me. And I never had anybody ask me to play with me up until that point when I was 10 years old. And so those were my first two allies. Didn't have that language then. When I look back, I look at them like these were my first two allies. And so really everybody wants to feel included. Everybody wants to feel belonging, and being asked to play on the playground is as simple as how we welcome people, as simple as how we practice allyship. So that's kind of like one of my founding stories that's brought me to where I am and what I do. The other story is then as I started to ascend in my career and get to the leadership table, I then started to hear voices of like, hey, we can't hire her. She has a stutter. We can't put her in front of clients. We can't promote her. She's pregnant. When you meet the chairman, make sure you're wearing a sexy dress and nice shoes. And so I was constantly hearing these types of messages, which were ultimately eroding at my confidence. And so for me, it was like, I wish I had had the kind of mentorship and allyship that exists today to be able for me to speak up. So when I was at my hope is that women do not have to hear this at the leadership table. It's like when you're meeting the chairman, I hope that the coaching is around, not around what you wear, but really in terms of how can you leverage this opportunity to build your influence? What's the data that this chairman needs to hear? I'm hoping that that's the advice that I receive or other women receive when they go to meet the chairman. So that's a little bit of a story of myself and how I got to the work that I do and why allyship is so important to me. So I know it was a long answer to your question.
No, I just love that. And I knew parts of that for sure, but to hear it again, first of all, I'm so sad that you had to go through that. I mean, there's, many in similar shoes to you that have had that, and that is what drives them. But as an ally, hopefully, I hope that someone calls me that, because, in the work you do, it's, you have to earn that, that position as well to be an ally. And how do you demonstrate it versus just, talking about it? But, I'm glad that you are doing what you're doing now. And it's interesting because ever since, what's happened with George Floyd, the last couple of years, the pandemic, and opening up the dialogue for more voices, but even the fact that the chairman, which I say chair now, ideally will be a woman as opposed to, or a non-gendered, non-binary person, like who knows, right? So even some language, right? There's so much more to do. So I love you sharing the stories. I do have some information and slides as well, so I can kind of toggle between that. But what I would love, and if anybody has questions as we go, again, feel free. It's a small group today. What do you think, because people, first of all, sponsor, the word sponsor has a lot of different definitions. But as it relates to this topic today about championing for others, and is there a definition that you've come up with or a way to explain exactly what sponsorship is? And we're going to talk a little bit about how it differs from those other ones. But what is sponsorship to you?
To me, a sponsor is somebody who is going to talk about you behind your back in a positive way. To me, a sponsor is somebody who's amplifying the work that you're doing, who's boosting your image, somebody who's looking out for opportunities for you, somebody who's willing to step up for you, correct any image challenges that you may have. But the sponsor is really leveraging their social capital, their reputation within the organization, within their network on your behalf. So they're really invested in you. And so that's where that's where the next question comes, which I might be stepping into, but it's like, then what's a mentor? And this is where I find that a lot of people think, many leaders think that they are being a sponsor, but really are playing the role of a mentor and not necessarily that of a sponsor. And it's really about giving your social capital away, putting your reputation on the line for that other individual. Sponsorship is done publicly, mentorship is done privately. Could be a way to distinguish it.
Yeah, I like that too, because I think that's the biggest differentiator, I think, is the fact that you are going beyond the giving of advice or based on your expertise, the road you've traveled already, so to speak, that you can, you know, give someone advice and it's one-on-one or sometimes group. But here, you really are going beyond and putting your reputation, as you said, on the line, that you are championing actively and you are saying, hey, I want you to meet this person because I think they'd be a great, you know, next level leader in your team, and really putting yourself out there, which I think sometimes maybe it's happened informally a little bit, but that's where it's like the challenge right now, I think, for organizations is how do they then take it to that next level, and you know, is it a formula that they can implement, and so this is, I think, it's a growing area for sure. I'm just going to share my screen, and I think if anybody else wants it, like a couple people have put on in the comments, you know, that they felt like they have been more of a mentor, had more mentoring. Oh, there's your company, which we'll share again, just so everybody knows. I do share the slides, and I'll share links to where to find Salima, as far as any of her programs. We'll talk a little bit about that too. One of the things, so this is from you, and we will make sure we put the in there. But I'd never heard, like, I have to say, even doing research, I'd never heard of like using social capital. And so one thing, if you don't mind us touching about, and again, there's some information here. I wanted to talk a little bit, if you're okay with it, and we'll come back to like mentorship and coaching and stuff later, but this whole power, you know, discussion around power, which I'm not sure, sometimes I don't love the word, but I get it. You know, I get that there are people that have that influence, right? And they do have the power to champion. So sorry, we can look at that later too. I'm going to go back. So would you be able to share what your thoughts are on, and anybody else, you know, can put their comments in there too, about this whole discussion around power in relation to this?
So it's interesting. There's two ways to kind of look at this. So I always say sponsorship is a way for you to grow your power. And what I mean by that is, by giving away our power, by giving away our social capital, it increases our power. And the way that it is because if I'm recognized, if I'm busy sponsoring other people and they're ascending in their careers and they're developing and growing, well, guess what? I then start to attract everybody, because everybody wants to work on my team because they know that Salima is the one who's going to really help develop me and help me to grow. So by giving away my power, it helps increase my power. So it's really unexpected in terms of what we expect to happen from sponsorship. And that's what I mean by my social capital. I'm putting my reputation on the line. I'm going out there and speaking on behalf of whoever my proteges are, whoever I'm saying this person is really effective, you know, rather that's you, Joanne, I can see in the screen, Derek 1 and Derek 2, right? It's I'm out there putting my reputation, my credibility, and saying I'm willing to speak for Derek and Joanne, and their work is really good, and you know, this is my understanding of it. This person would be really good at this project. That's my social capital. Because imagine if for whatever reason, you know, Derek doesn't show up and do a good job. Well, they're going to be like, Salima, who's this person that you sent me? Right. And so that's what my social capital is. And so we as sponsors need to be careful about who we're willing to do that for. But when we do it, it's not just the reward of that good feeling of, hey, I've made a difference in helping somebody in their career, but it's more so it actually increases my influence and it attracts talent as well.
I love that. Yeah. I think it's one of the things that I always find that large organizations start with these programs. So if we look at the Fortune 500s, the stats that we have on mentorship, 71% of Fortune 500s have mentorship. Do you think that this is only, I mean, I'm probably going to answer my own question, but do you think there's a way to bring this to all organizations, even smaller and medium ones? Because I think so many of the larger, I'm seeing more companies talking about sponsorship now. There's not as many, not so much as it relates to allyship, and we'll get into that. But what do you think is going to drive it to get more people getting on board for it? There's a couple questions in there.
Yeah. So the answer to the first question around, can people in smaller organizations put this in place? The question is absolutely yes. This is a really important part of your succession planning. This is really about your talent management and your talent retention. Those are really important strategies for that. So if you're thinking about talent management, talent retention, and engagement, and those are challenges for you, then absolutely the answer is yes, sponsorship has a role in your organization. I forget what the second question was, Helen.
Oh, sorry, now I do. That's so bad. No, that's so bad. Yeah, what do you think we're going to see more of it? Like, how are we going to get more people on board for it? More,
well,
it starts with leadership too, right? Like,
yes.
I see it as part of an EDI strategy that you would then have this as part of it versus like, oh, we're going to have mentoring, coaching, sponsorship programs. Like, well, you need to measure EDI. You want to, so, that's where I think it's how would someone go about starting to think about how do we introduce it? Because I think for me, I find a lot of clients I work with are smaller as well, but different sizes. But it's not so much that it's buzzword, but it's like it's newer. So people we want it, but how do we, where's the best place to start? And I think that for me, I was just thinking about this because of the topic.
Yeah.
And I think that part of it, because what you're talking about with allyship is really part of equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, right?
Yes, and I say that yes, and is that a sponsorship is a powerful strategy for moving your DEI efforts forward, but it's beyond that. And it comes back to, this is something that impacts all your employees. So it's not just for DEI, but if there's something specific that if you have specific DEI goals that you're looking to achieve, then yes, this is a strategy. But I would say sponsorship is an overall broader strategy that's connected to talent development, connected to retention, talent to your succession planning. So it fits a broader strategy.
I love the relation. I mean, as part of your succession planning, it's a huge one, because then as the leaders are actually sitting there thinking, okay, the key roles we have, what are our plans over the next couple of years, and they could actually have that discussion to say, well, let's look at sponsorship and thinking about, oh, who are we going to advocate to get to those roles. So I think that's a really, really amazing linkage. And in the work that I've done in succession and, read books and looked at methodologies, I would say that would have never been a discussion point in the past. So I think that's really unique to bring that in as well.
And that's why, and just Helen, I would add to that, that's why it's so important to understand the difference between the mentor and the sponsor. Because when you sit down and have those conversations, if we're not asking the right questions, then you may be stuck at the mentor level and not moving to sponsor level. So that's why it's also important to understand those distinctions.
Mm-hmm. And I think and what's interesting, just so everybody else here knows as well too. So when I set out on the journey to research all things mentorship, and I'll tell you my story about that. I was at a large global technology company, and there was a large team I was part of, And one of the managers came to me and said, "Did you know that there's a mentorship program?" And I said, "I had no idea." And actually, the entire leadership team didn't even know. And I'd been there for a while. And so this one particular manager and I started digging into this and saying, why did we like, let's get to HR. I wasn't in HR at the time. I was actually part of the marketing and product management team. And helping them with their thought leadership and looking at product compliance. Long story about that, but I thought that was so interesting. So that's where it's sort of like, ooh, is this like a hidden program? Is this just for the chosen few? And so even mentorship. So that was I left 5 years ago, 2017. So that would have been sort of how I started my journey. And then when I started researching mentorship, there were about a dozen platforms, and now there are at least 40 that I know of. And now that I've been looking at sponsorship recently, I've found a few that actually mention sponsorship now, but not many. So until it starts to, get out there, and I think I mentioned a book that I just came across called Decoding Sponsorship, again, written in 2021. There weren't a lot before. So I think it's so great. And before we touch on the allyship piece, because I want to dig into that a bit more, I just think it's really relevant to know that, sometimes there are things that are spoken about, but, Catalyst, as I said, has been talking about this for at least 10 years, but it hasn't become mainstream at all. It hasn't been, and even mentoring. So if you think about the difference in 5 years, it's just growing, which is ridiculous. I'm like, why hasn't it been growing more? And again, not just for hypos, necessarily, not just for the, emerging leaders, like everybody you could really, go down that route for mentorship. But can we touch a little bit on the coaching now? Because I think that's the other thing. There's a lot of confusion about how sponsorship would be. You've already talked about what it is, but how is it a little different from coaching, and how is mentorship a little bit different from coaching? I have my own, opinions, and I've done, again, research on that. But I thought, because you are an executive coach as well, I'd love to know how you see the distinctions between the three of them as well.
So I would say first is a mentor and a sponsor can absolutely play the role of a coach. So it's not that you're choosing one or the other. I would say coaching is also something that's done in private. So between you and the protege or the coachee. Coaching is also where you're tapping into, as a coach, you're looking at that individual and going, I'm tapping into your wisdom and allowing you to find the answers, allowing you to use your resources so that you can come up with what's right. And I'm asking you questions to be able to expand your awareness and your thinking. So coaching is very much about allowing the coachee to tap into their brilliance and their experience and so on, versus a sponsor or mentor is really bringing forward. A sponsor is able to see above and talking about them at tables they're not invited to, and sharing with them, like, these are the discussions that are being having at the table that you're not invited to. Versus a mentor is kind of being the guide, the Sherpa. Hey, look out for this, look out for that, ask for this, ask for that. You should be thinking about this. So the mentor is more of a guide.
Yeah, I love that. And the one thing I did hear, I think it was from Catalyst, is like, to just simplify it, is that a mentor talks to you, and a coach talks with you, and a sponsor talks about you. And I love that. Very simple.
Yes.
I think it came from Catalyst originally, although I see people quoting it, and it's just, this is where the internet, it's like, I think Catalyst came up with it originally. I was going to quote a coach that I interviewed one time, and I'm realizing, he got it from somewhere else, but that's just a really quick way. And I love, the private distinction, and the coaching world has boomed quite a bit. And so that's the other thing, is like, organizations are looking at, teaching managers skill sets to actually be able to be coach like. But there's so many different, I mean, this is we could have a whole, probably a 2-3 day conference on all this stuff, because, how to teach people to ask the right questions. And, there are distinctions with those hats. And I think that that's where it's important, because, traditional mentorship, that's what it is. It is, you have some sort of experience. And that's why reciprocal, you can share. But this distinction with sponsorship about really, really going above and beyond for this individual and giving them that opportunity. I think that this is going to really open a lot of doors for people. And so it's just like, how do you make it? How do you do it now? Right. So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure if anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat or put your hand up, and we'll get to that. I'm just going to share my screen again, and I will share this, but just to show you, I did a little chart. I will probably look at it again, because I think a lot of times with mentors too, sometimes that there's time bound. And then, so Salima, I won't go into too much detail with that, with the differences, but people can look at that later. Sorry, now I'm getting crazy fingers here. We're going to talk a little bit about allyship. So this is the thing, this is like, you probably give long presentations on this, and how do you actually now start to look at this in relation to allyship.
Yeah.
And I'd love you to just kind of, if you can give a few pointers on how it's connected for people here. I know that there is a couple people on the call that are actually looking at belonging and inclusion strategies, and so this is something that could be a piece of it. And so how would you recommend that you discuss sponsorship and allyship together?
So first, I want to start off with some data, which is that the data was done by the Women in the Workplace report by McKinsey and Lean In. And in this report, it shows that there's, I don't remember the exact number, but it's a 76% around there of leaders who identify themselves as allies. And then when they asked Black and Latin employees, it's actually like maybe 11% of people feel like they're receiving allyship. And so what we're noticing is that there's this high intention, but there's a real gap when it comes to action. So that's a really important place to kind of understand, is that there's a real gap. And oftentimes what's getting in the way of the gap is that there's this uncomfortableness. It's like, oh my God, what if I do this wrong? What if I don't say the right things? What if I'm not showing up and saying the right things at the right time? And so the allyship piece is really about giving individuals, leaders, tools, the language to be able to speak up against the status quo, being comfortable with saying something against the status quo. And so that's sponsorship, I find, is actually something I would say that is high impact, low touch. And what I mean by that is that sponsorship can have tremendous impact for those leaders, in high potentials, emerging leaders within your organization. And for you as the sponsor, it's a low touch. There's not a lot of onus on you other than to talk about that person, other than to champion them, other than to steer them. And so that's the connection there, is that it is helping to bridge that gap between, formulating and saying, yes, I'm an ally, and doing an action, taking action to be able to help move this forward. There's a real, one of the data that you showed earlier is that there's a real gap. There's a leaky pipeline when it comes to promotions. And we can see that women of color, so it's white men, white women, men of color, women of color. And in that order, that's how people are being promoted. So women of color are at the bottom of the rung, and there's a leaky pipeline. The only way to fix that is that if sponsors and allies are actively targeting the women of color and helping them to move forward. And so sponsorship is just one strategy of allyship.
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned at the beginning, it's really broad. There are so many ways, right? And so, and again, it's not just walking. I mean, it's walking the talk, but it's
Mhm.
actually taking, I love that it's taking the action. And the McKinsey Lean In study there is a link in the presentation there for people to dig in a lot more, because I'm so glad that there is research, and we're just kind of just starting that out. And that's where the gaps, it's that gaps. And for companies, they also have to start with looking at their own demographics first,
Mhm.
right, to
Yes.
do the analysis. I have an interesting, this is another question, and again, if anybody else has any, but I did have quite a few planned questions, because this is what we do here, we just have a little dialogue. But the um the one thing, I think we touched on this when we were chatting about what we wanted to discuss today. Um, there a lot of times people are writing, and they're focusing on, we want to see people that are like us in the
Mm,
C-suite and in those levels. Yet we talked a little bit about allyship, and sponsorship can be different. In fact, you don't necessarily need to look for a sponsor that's like you. You just, there may be a connection, or a sponsor may, may be the white male or something like that, right? So do you have any thoughts on that, just just comments or your thoughts on it? And then maybe we could talk about a little bit about, is there a way to find a sponsor, or vice versa? Like, how do you be there's a few more questions I have, but let's stop there,
mm.
because I
Yeah,
have like three more probably. I want to be mindful of the time. There we go.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I get asked this question a lot in terms of like, hey, I'm looking up at the leaders around me. I don't see anyone like me. How can I find a sponsor? And so what I always say is, what you're looking for in a sponsor is not somebody who looks like you, but somebody who's familiar with your work, and somebody who has influence, somebody who's going to get you the exposure that you need. And so you're, as Helen, as you mentioned, it might be that white male. And that's totally okay. But if you know that they're going to be speaking about you favorably and have a strong influence within the organization, that's the perfect person to target as a sponsor.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And that's where, oh, here, Derek, when you mentor or sponsor someone, what is it that you hope to see from the people you mentor or sponsor? Hmm,
Mm,
that's a good one.
yeah. So, Derek, I would want to know a little bit more around that question. I would say, like, what's your intention? Because one of the first questions I say in my sponsorship plan in my worksheet is like, the mentee or the protege has, are you clear on their career objectives? And so for you as a sponsor or mentee, what is your objective for you to step up to be that mentor or sponsor?
I guess like I don't know. What do you like expect people to say other than like obviously I feel like the end goal of it all, everyone's answer would be like I want to advance my career. Like I can't imagine someone's answer branching off too far from that. And I was kind of like curious more to like what traits and like things do you expect like of a mentor or sponsor for them to help build like that relationship with their sponsor or mentor, and what can they do to kind of like build that positive relationship with those people.
Mhm.
You know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So you are right. Typically it is, how do I get to the next role? For some, it's going to be, how do I build the skill? It might be building skills. It might be, how do I get on boards? So really the most important first question that you need to have in this relationship is like, what are your objectives and what would you like to see? And then from there, you can really start to partner with them. And oftentimes it might be as simple as, let's invite you to some meetings, come and shadow meetings so you can hear the language that's being used. You can hear what are the decisions that are being made and how decisions are being made and what's the data that's being used to make those decisions. And so really important to understand and know, because actually there's sometimes, and I've had somebody share this with me, it's like, I actually don't want career advancement. I'm actually at a place in my career where I'm very happy where I am. But what I am looking for is, I am looking for skills building. I am looking for, how can I actually do this with less time? How can I get more balance in my life? So really understanding what that protege or the mentee's goals are will be a really important place for you to start. And then for you to know how to show up as that mentor or sponsorship, because it might just be that they just need a mentor and not necessarily sponsorship.
Yeah, and I love that because when I think about mentoring and all the programs I've been involved in, that's the starting point. Well, there's objectives and the why for the program itself, like, you talked about it, retention, engagement, all of those things, but there's on the individual level for the mentor, what is it you want to gain? What is, and the mentee sometimes has, they have to go through their own process of asking themselves questions about it. But I find that that's, having been a mentor in many cases, that's the first thing we talk about. So what are the goals you're looking for? And some of them are, I want to enhance my presentation skills. It's very particular. Can I help with that, or can I refer you to some other people or courses, or or is it I would like to gain a little bit more understanding. We're all in, a lot of people in HR here, of compensation, and so how do I go about that? Is it meeting people? Versus with sponsorship, I would say that is, likelihood is that person really does want to get those opportunities. Like it may be another promotion or something, but it also may be there's a huge project happening right now and I would love to be part of that initiative, and even if it's like a secondment or something. So I think that's a really good questions, Derek. So thank you. I saw that
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Helen, I was just rereading Derek's question. And to answer this, if the question is around how do I actually find somebody to mentor or sponsor, I think you also want to be looking for, if you're going to be spending your social capital on somebody, you want to be doing it on somebody whom you've seen their work, and that you have seen the quality of the work and they're willing to spend your social capital on them. So you want to be identifying people who you can stand up for and speak about, but also for people you feel that would be willing to do the work. For if you were to say, hey, I got you this additional project for you to work on, make sure that person actually wants that additional work or to those stretch projects. So really important that there's a fit in terms of that person is going to be willing to step up and do the additional things that may be required.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have some thoughts on how a sponsor, how can they be very effective? Is that something you would cover in your, we're going to talk a little bit about a couple programs that you have, so to share with people, but is that something you would, actually work with executives to assist them on how to be an effective sponsor?
Yeah, so I either do that. I often get that question when I'm coaching with executives, but I've also now developed a program called The Art of Sponsorship. And it's really designed around this exact question in terms of how do I actually show up as a sponsor and what does this mean? And so, you had a slide previously that you had, which was a framework from a Harvard Business Review, which are the ABCDs of showing up as a sponsor. And so I don't know if you're able to bring up that slide, but in my workshop, what I do is I actually talk about what is your role as a sponsor and how do you actually talk about somebody? Yes, this is the slide. So the ABCs are amplifying, boosting, connecting, and defending. And so, amplifying is you're willing to share the accomplishments of your protege and the great work that they've done, the impact that they have. Boosting is that you're really using your reputation to advocate for the protege. That might be in a meeting, it might be a recommendation, it might be a LinkedIn recommendation or referral. However, you're able to boost and expand their exposure. Connecting them is really about leveraging your network and helping them build that exposure. And this is also around shadowing. This is the executive shadowing that I had talked about before, and inviting them to meetings so that they can be, seeing what else, what's happening in conversations and tables, 1 or 2 levels above them. And it could also be about ensuring that they're having conversations, but conversations with your skip level, so that they're building exposure and having an opportunity in terms of what's happening above. And then this is a really important one that most people don't often think about their role as a sponsor, but it's the defending. And this is around challenging negative perceptions, defending your protege from individuals who don't support them. And I have a personal story around this. And this is that when I first joined Edelman as vice president, within the first couple of weeks, I had found out that there was an individual in an office in Vancouver who was sharing their viewpoint, which was they felt like I was the wrong person for the role. And this person was somebody I had never met before. And this person was like, why is this person saying this about me and sharing this with leaders and other people when they haven't even met me? And so it was my job, my sponsor's job came to me and said, hey, this is what's being said about you. And then secondly said, I don't want you to worry because we hired you for your leadership. We know why we hired you. And so I don't want you to worry about these rumblings that are happening. So the sponsor played the first 2 parts right. The third part was where the sponsor kind of fell short, was being able to defend me to that individual and to say, you got issues, come speak to me, but don't talk about your dirty laundry. Don't be somebody who's sharing all of this. They didn't stop it. They didn't truly defend me to that individual. And so that's actually a really important role as part of a sponsor, to be thinking about defending and helping them to change their perceptions. Because when somebody is advancing their career, it is not just about their performance. It is about their image. In fact, performance is only 10% of the formula. Their image and their exposure are really important as part of their development. And so your job as your sponsor is building that exposure in their image. And part of their image, building their image, could be defending it and correcting it.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm glad we came back to this, because again, this is just amazing, important work. And as it grows, I think, and just understanding about what it means to be a sponsor, and then, how to be successful on both sides, right? The whole idea is to make it work. So it'll be interesting to see what companies will start to get out there a little bit more. I'll do some more exploring, and I know you have some great information on that too. So this was just a couple of other things. Again, we talked a little bit about this already, how to be a great sponsor. And I put in a couple of resources, but there's likely more. There's other links in the presentation. So as I mentioned, I'll share them. I mean, I think back, I mean, it's been like 50 years or more that we've been, trying to get equity for women in the workplace. And now we have more to do. I think, ideally, I mean, it's sometimes handing it down to the next generation, but we will guide them as much as we can to, maybe not make the mistakes that we've made or something. But I think that the more we can open up conversation and share resources and have people understand, the importance of being an ally, of championing for others who have been historically disadvantaged. I mean, it's a great thing to see. So I just wanted to say thank you quickly to Salima for taking the time today to join Life Works Well Mentor Circle. I'm really grateful that I got to know you. I just love following your work. I'm going to share the links to where you are as well with people that came today. So, and thanks everybody who takes the time to come or watch the recording. Let us know what you think. We'll likely, Mohini will likely send out a little survey as well. And then there's a couple minutes for more questions, but if you want to just share, Salima, because this, when they get the presentation, these link to your information, but do you want to just maybe take a couple of minutes and like talk about what's next and how people can get a hold of you?
Yeah.
And then everybody here, I think, knows where I am. So I'm going to stop the share again. So thanks again, everybody. But yeah, what's next for you, and where can, oh, Brenda said, thank you. Interesting discussion. So hopefully there's some tips for her. Where can people reach you if they'd like to? What's happening? Maybe a little bit about your programs, and then if there's any more questions.
Well, first, Helen, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me and creating space for this important topic. I noticed as I was talking, like I became really passionate and really kind of like, as I was talking, and I realized that, whoa, I don't need to be so strong in there, but the passion came through. So yeah, this is, in terms of what's next for me, I mean, I'm really out there talking about, I have two programs around sponsorship. One is a workshop really designed, the art of sponsorship. And it's like I mentioned, it's really about helping sponsors to step up as a sponsor, understanding the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, understanding the mini-me effect, and then, you know, them walking away with a sponsorship plan. The other part of the sponsorship place is really around breaking through the glass ceiling, is what I call it. And it's really designed for the emerging leaders, for those people who are looking for sponsors, but don't understand what to expect from a sponsor, what to look for in a sponsor, and what to ask of a sponsor. And so, you know, you mentioned earlier, Helen, this is really a symbiotic relationship, and both parties need to understand their role. And so I've designed workshops for both parties to be able to get the most out of this important allyship tool. I also have a leadership accelerator for women of color. And again, this is for leaders that who may not have had access to leadership development, or who are looking to create a safe space to be able to talk about what some of their challenges are, and give them a personal advisory board. It's a combination of personal one-to-one coaching circles, and skills building. And so I'm super excited about this program, because I've just seen the development that happens when women invest in themselves and in their careers, and how it just really expands what's possible for them. So those are that's really where I'm focused at in my programs. You can contact me at unleashforward.com. And I also have a monthly newsletter where I'm always sharing my latest and greatest in terms of new tools or tips, or even stories and case studies. And so I just, again, want to say thank you so much for coming for this topic. And it was really lovely to spend the hour with you, Helen.
Well, that just whipped by. I think when you're so passionate, it just comes out, and I just love it. And so for everyone here, please reach out to Salima. I'll include your information also in our newsletter. But I really think if you're looking for someone who, for the organizations, because I know some of the people here do work quite a bit, you know, with you know, there's someone from government, there's a couple people that are working with other clients, and as I mentioned, so many people have reached out to me for EDI, and I think this is another great way, and a simple, I don't think it's very complicated to get this in an organization, but with the right guidance, right, so that it does stick. And so your programs sound fantastic. And I know that we'll collaborate because we're both so passionate about all these things, but I thought that was great. And so I really appreciate it. Feel free to reach out to Salima if you have more questions. And I, again, want to thank everybody for showing up today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your summer and have a wonderful time. And then just really quickly, for Life Works Well, as I mentioned, we have these monthly. And so coming up for us, in September, we're focusing on communications, because one of the things we've been really trying to do is move the dialogue from human resources to actually human relations, and focusing on these topics. So we're going to be focusing on communicating with heart. So, you know, we're all about HR with heart, mentor with heart, now sponsor with heart, but communicate with heart. And then in October, healthy workplace. And then in November, my book is coming out. So we're going to be focusing on mentorship. create a mentor culture. So, you know, hopefully, I'm not saying hopefully, but hopefully you'll get a copy, and there's some interesting information. So November, and then December, we're going to look at volunteerism and corporate social responsibility as well. So there's always fun. Usually it's a small group, lots of interactive discussion here. But yeah, hope to chat, reach out anytime to us as well. And thanks again, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Enjoy the rest of your summer. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Thanks again, Salima. Really appreciate it. It was wonderful.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Bye.
Bye.